Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls growing up in small-town Nebraska. While her classmates were playing with dolls and having tea parties, she was out in the fields with her grandfather, learning to hunt rabbits and prairie dogs with an old .22 rifle. Her grandfather, a Korean War veteran named Frank, had noticed something special about his granddaughter from the very first day he put a rifle in her hands when she was 8 years old. "This one's got the eye," he would tell anyone who would listen, watching as young Sarah consistently hit targets that grown men struggled with. Natural-born shooter, just like her great-grandmother was. Sarah's great-grandmother had been somewhat of a legend in their family. During the Great Depression, she had kept the family fed by hunting game when money was too tight for store-bought meat. Stories told that she could drop a running deer at 300 yards with iron sights, and never once came home empty-handed when the family needed food on the table. Growing up, Sarah spent every weekend and summer vacation at her grandfather's small ranch. While other kids her age were glued to television screens or playing video games, she was learning the fundamentals of marksmanship. Frank taught her everything he knew about shooting, breath control, trigger squeeze, sight alignment, and, most importantly, patience and respect for firearms. "Shooting isn't about being tough or showing off," Frank would say, adjusting her grip on the rifle. "It's about discipline, focus, and understanding that every shot you take has consequences. You miss your target, and dinner doesn't get on the table. You make a careless mistake, and someone could get hurt." By the time Sarah was 12, she was out shooting most of the adult men who came to Frank's informal shooting matches on Saturday afternoons. These weren't official competitions, just local ranchers and farmers getting together to practice their marksmanship and share stories. But word began to spread about Frank Martinez's granddaughter, who could put 5 shots through the same hole at 100 yards. The local gun store owner, Bob Thompson, first heard about Sarah's abilities from Frank during one of his regular visits to buy ammunition. Bob had been skeptical at first. He'd heard plenty of grandfathers bragging about their grandchildren's various talents over the years. But Frank wasn't the type to exaggerate, and when he invited Bob to come see for himself, curiosity got the better of him. That following Saturday, Bob drove out to Frank's place with his own custom rifle, expecting to humor an old man's pride in his granddaughter. What he witnessed that day changed his entire perspective on what natural talent could look like. Sarah, then 13 years old and barely tall enough to properly shoulder a full-size rifle, proceeded to demonstrate shooting skills that Bob had only seen from professional marksmen. She started with a standard target at 50 yards, placing 10 shots in a group so tight that Bob had to use a magnifying glass to count the holes. When Frank suggested moving the target back to 100 yards, Bob expected to see the group size increase dramatically. Instead, Sarah's group actually got smaller, as if the increased distance somehow helped her focus even more intently. "How long has she been shooting?" Bob asked Frank quietly, as Sarah prepared for another string of shots. "About 5 years now," Frank replied, watching his granddaughter with obvious pride. "But I've never seen anything like it. Some folks are just born with gifts, and this little girl's gift happens to be putting bullets exactly where she wants them to go." Bob Thompson owned the largest gun store in 3 counties and had been around firearms his entire life. He'd seen military veterans, police officers, competitive shooters, and hunters of every skill level. But he'd never witnessed raw, untrained talent like what he was seeing from this teenage girl on a dusty ranch in rural Nebraska. Word of Sarah's exceptional shooting ability spread through their small community like wildfire. People began making special trips to Frank's place on Saturdays just to see the girl who could reportedly shoot better than men with decades of experience. Some came as skeptics, others came hoping to learn something, and a few came simply because they refused to believe the stories they'd heard. One particularly memorable Saturday, a group of local police officers showed up, having heard the tales from Bob Thompson. The lead officer, Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, was a former Marine who had served 2 tours in Iraq and considered himself an expert marksman. He brought along his department-issued rifle and a case full of precision ammunition, confident that he could easily outshoot any teenage girl, regardless of the local gossip. Frank welcomed the officers warmly and set up a formal competition. The rules were simple. Each shooter would fire 10 rounds at targets placed at 100 yards, with the smallest group size determining the winner. Sergeant Rodriguez would shoot first, followed by 2 other officers, and then Sarah would take her turn. The sergeant took his time, using every bit of training and experience he had acquired over his years in the military and law enforcement. His shots were impressive by any reasonable standard, a group measuring just under 2 inches across, which would have been considered excellent shooting by most people's standards. The other 2 officers shot respectable groups as well, though neither came close to matching their sergeant's precision. There was some good-natured ribbing and joking as they examined their targets, all 3 men feeling confident that they had set a standard that would be difficult for anyone to match, let alone a young girl with no formal training. Then, it was Sarah's turn. She approached the shooting bench with the same calm demeanor that had impressed Bob Thompson months earlier. There was no nervous energy, no obvious pressure from performing in front of law enforcement officers who had driven over an hour to test her abilities. She simply checked her rifle, confirmed her 0, and settled into her shooting position with the natural grace of someone who had been doing this for most of her life. The first shot rang out across the prairie, and Frank called through his spotting scope that it had hit dead center of the target. The second shot followed quickly, then the third, fourth, and fifth. Sarah's rhythm was steady and consistent, each shot fired with the same deliberate timing as the one before. When she had finished her 10 rounds, Sergeant Rodriguez walked downrange with the other officers to examine the target. What they found defied their expectations so completely that Rodriguez actually asked Frank to bring out a fresh target so they could verify that Sarah had indeed fired at the same target as everyone else. Her 10 shots had created a single ragged hole in the center of the target that measured less than half an inch across. Not only had she beaten everyone else's groups, she had beaten them so decisively that there was no question about her superiority as a marksman. Where did she learn to shoot like that? Rodriguez asked Frank, genuinely amazed by what he had witnessed. Right here on this ranch, Frank replied. I taught her everything I know, but the truth is she was already better than me by the time she turned 12. What you just saw isn't the result of training or practice, though she's done plenty of both. That's a natural ability that maybe one person in a million is born with. The officers left that day with a story they would tell for years to come, and Sarah's reputation began to spread beyond their small farming community. Bob Thompson started mentioning her to competitive shooters who visited his store, and some of those shooters began making their own pilgrimages to Frank's ranch to see the girl who could reportedly outshoot anyone. As Sarah entered high school, her shooting abilities continued to improve despite having what most people would consider very limited opportunities for advancement. There were no shooting teams at her school, no formal coaching available, and no nearby facilities for competitive shooting sports. Everything she learned came from her grandfather's patient instruction and her own relentless practice. But Frank Martinez was beginning to worry about his granddaughter's future. He could see that her talent was extraordinary, possibly even Olympic level. But he also knew that talent alone wouldn't be enough if she wanted to pursue shooting as more than just a hobby. She would need proper coaching, access to better equipment, and opportunities to compete against other elite shooters. More importantly, Frank was getting older and wasn't sure how much longer he would be able to provide the guidance that Sarah needed. At 73, his eyesight wasn't what it used to be, and his hands sometimes trembled when he tried to demonstrate proper shooting techniques. He had taught her everything he knew, but he was honest enough to admit that his knowledge had limitations. The solution to Frank's concerns came from an unexpected source. During one of their Saturday shooting sessions, a visitor arrived who would change the entire trajectory of Sarah's life. His name was Colonel James Mitchell, and he had driven over 200 miles from Offutt Air Force Base after hearing about Sarah's abilities through military channels. Colonel Mitchell was the commanding officer of the base's competitive shooting team, and he was always on the lookout for exceptional talent. The Air Force had a long tradition of excellence in marksmanship, and Mitchell took pride in fielding teams that could compete with anyone in the military or civilian shooting communities. What brought Colonel Mitchell to Frank's ranch wasn't just curiosity about a young shooter with natural talent. The Air Force was in the process of restructuring its approach to competitive shooting, with new emphasis on identifying and developing promising shooters at younger ages. They had funding available for coaching, equipment, and travel to competitions, but they needed to find the right candidates to invest in. Frank welcomed Colonel Mitchell with the same hospitality he showed all visitors, but he could sense that this visit was different from the casual drop-ins they had grown accustomed to. Mitchell wasn't here just to watch Sarah shoot for entertainment. He was evaluating her potential as a serious competitive shooter. The informal test that Mitchell set up was more challenging than anything Sarah had attempted before. Instead of shooting at stationary targets from a bench rest, he asked her to engage multiple targets at varying distances, shooting from different positions and adapting to changing conditions as the afternoon wind picked up. Sarah rose to every challenge that Mitchell presented. When he asked her to hit a 6-inch steel plate at 200 yards from a standing position, she connected with her first shot. When he placed targets at 100, 150, and 200 yards and asked her to engage them in sequence, she hit all three in under 10 seconds. Most impressively, when he asked her to shoot a challenging course of fire that included precision shots mixed with rapid engagement of multiple targets, she completed it flawlessly. Colonel Mitchell had tested dozens of potential recruits over his career, and he had never seen anyone with Sarah's combination of natural accuracy, composure under pressure, and ability to adapt to new challenges. By the time the afternoon was over, he had made up his mind to offer her an opportunity that could transform her hobby into something much more significant. The offer he presented to Sarah and Frank was extraordinary. The Air Force would provide complete funding for her training with some of the best shooting coaches in the country, access to world-class equipment and facilities, and opportunities to compete in national and international competitions. In exchange, Sarah would commit to joining the Air Force after high school and representing the service in competitive shooting. It was the kind of opportunity that Frank had dreamed of for his granddaughter, but never dared to hope might actually materialize. Sarah would have access to resources and training that money couldn't buy, and she would be competing against the best shooters in the world instead of just impressing visitors to a rural Nebraska ranch. The decision wasn't difficult for Sarah. She had always known that shooting was more than just a hobby for her. It was her passion and possibly her calling. The chance to develop her skills to their full potential while serving her country was everything she could have asked for. That evening, as Colonel Mitchell prepared to drive back to Offutt Air Force Base, he made Frank Martinez a promise that would prove to be prophetic. "Your granddaughter has a gift that I've never seen before," he told Frank as they shook hands goodbye. "With the right training and opportunities, there's no limit to what she might accomplish. I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up being one of the finest marksmen in military history." Frank watched the colonel's car disappear down the dirt road that led away from his ranch, knowing that his granddaughter's life was about to change in ways that none of them could fully imagine. The little girl who had started shooting rabbit with an old .22 rifle was about to begin a journey that would eventually lead her to face down the most elite marksman in the world. But that journey would not be without its challenges. Sarah would soon discover that exceptional ability often comes with skepticism from those who haven't witnessed it firsthand, and that proving herself would require more than just accurate shooting. She would need to develop the mental toughness to handle doubters, the confidence to perform under extreme pressure, and the determination to prove that her grandfather's faith in her abilities was completely justified. Sarah's transition from rural Nebraska to Air Force basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas was more jarring than she had anticipated. The girl who had grown up with endless sky and open prairies suddenly found herself surrounded by concrete buildings, chain-link fences, and thousands of other recruits from every corner of America. The first few weeks of basic training were a blur of early morning wake-up calls, physical conditioning, classroom instruction, and learning the countless details of military life. Sarah adapted well to the discipline and structure, finding that her grandfather's emphasis on attention to detail and following instructions serve her well in the regimented environment. But it wasn't until the fourth week of training, when her flight was scheduled for weapons familiarization, that Sarah's unique abilities became apparent to her fellow recruits and the training instructors. Up until that point, she had been just another trainee, quiet, competent, and unremarkable in the sea of young people learning to become airmen. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres had been a weapons instructor at Lackland for 6 years, and he had seen thousands of recruits handle firearms for the first time. Most were nervous, some were overconfident, and a few demonstrated natural ability that suggested they might do well in security forces or other careers that required marksmanship skills. When Sarah's flight arrived at the firing range that hot Texas morning, Torres began his standard safety briefing and basic instruction on the M16A2 service rifle. He had no reason to expect that this group would be any different from the hundreds of others he had trained, and the slight, quiet girl from Nebraska certainly didn't stand out as anyone special. The morning started with dry fire practice, allowing recruits to become familiar with the weapon's controls and basic operation without live ammunition. Torres moved through the group, correcting grips, adjusting shooting positions, and providing individual guidance as needed. When he reached Sarah, he was impressed by how quickly she had absorbed the instruction and how naturally she handled the rifle. "Have you shot before, Martinez?" he asked, noting her correct sight alignment and trigger finger placement. "Yes, Sergeant," Sarah replied simply, not elaborating on her background. "Hunting with Dad?" Torres assumed, having heard similar answers from countless recruits over the years. "Something like that, Sergeant," Sarah responded, not mentioning that her hunting experience included consistently outperforming military veterans and law enforcement officers. When the flight moved to live fire exercises, Torres expected to see the usual mix of results. Some recruits would struggle to hit the target at all, others would show modest improvement throughout the session, and a few might demonstrate enough promise to warrant encouragement for marksmanship-related career fields. What he didn't expect was to see someone shoot a perfect score on their first attempt with a service rifle they had never fired before. Sarah's first magazine of 20 rounds produced 20 hits in the black, with most shots clustered in the center of the target in a group that would have been impressive from an experienced marksman. Torres checked her target twice, then called over Technical Sergeant Lisa Park, the senior instructor, to verify what he was seeing. "Is this her first magazine?" Park asked, examining the target through binoculars. "First time touching an M16, Torres confirmed. "Says she's done some hunting, but this isn't hunting accuracy. This is expert-level marksmanship." Word of Sarah's exceptional shooting spread quickly through the instructor staff. By the time her flight finished the morning session, several instructors who weren't even assigned to her group had found excuses to observe her shooting. The afternoon session, which was supposed to be a simple qualification course, turned into an informal demonstration of abilities that left everyone who witnessed it talking for days afterward. Technical Sergeant Park decided to give Sarah challenges that went well beyond the standard basic training curriculum. Instead of shooting only at the prescribed distances with standard time limits, she asked Sarah to engage targets at extended ranges with reduced time allowances. Each challenge was met with the same calm precision that had impressed Colonel Mitchell back in Nebraska. "Where exactly did you learn to shoot like this, Martinez?" Park asked during a break between firing exercises. "My grandfather taught me, Sergeant," Sarah replied. "Started when I was 8. "Your grandfather must have been quite a marksman himself," Park observed. "He was good, Sergeant, but he always said I was better than him by the time I turned 12. Park had been in the Air Force for 15 years and had trained with some of the finest marksmen in the military. She had never seen a basic trainee demonstrate the level of skill that Sarah was displaying, and she was beginning to understand why Colonel Mitchell had been so interested in recruiting this particular young woman. But not everyone was impressed by Sarah's abilities. Among her fellow recruits, reactions ranged from admiration to skepticism to outright resentment. Some genuinely appreciated having someone in their flight who could help bring up the overall group scores. Others questioned whether her performance was somehow the result of luck, special treatment, or exaggerated reporting. Airman First Class Dare Johnson was particularly vocal in his skepticism. Johnson had grown up in Detroit and had never been around firearms before joining the Air Force, but he considered himself naturally athletic and competitive. The idea that some girl from Nebraska farm country could outshoot him so decisively was difficult for his ego to accept. "I bet she couldn't do it again if she tried," Johnson muttered to several other recruits after the day's shooting was finished. "Probably just got lucky, or maybe the instructors are going easy on her because she's a girl." His comments sparked a debate among the recruits that continued through dinner and into the evening. Some defended Sarah's obvious skill, while others echoed Johnson's skepticism. The controversy might have remained just dorm room gossip if Johnson hadn't decided to make his doubts public the next day. During the following morning's physical training session, Johnson approached Sarah directly in front of their entire flight. "Hey, Martinez," he called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I heard you got lucky on the range yesterday. Think you could do it again? Or was that just beginner's luck?" The challenge was unmistakable, and every recruit in the flight stopped what they were doing to see how Sarah would respond. She could have ignored the provocation, reported Johnson for creating a distraction, or simply walked away. Instead, she chose to address his challenge directly. "What exactly are you suggesting, Johnson?" she asked calmly. "I'm saying maybe you're not as good as everyone thinks you are," Johnson replied, emboldened by the attention he was receiving from the other recruits. "Maybe you just got lucky yesterday, and if we had a fair competition, things would be different." "What would you consider a fair competition?" Sarah asked, her voice remaining level and controlled. Johnson hadn't expected her to engage with his challenge so directly, and he found himself improvising an answer. "How about we see who can shoot better when it actually matters? Not just some basic training qualification, but real competition shooting where there's pressure and stakes." What Johnson didn't know was that Sarah had been competing under pressure since she was 12 years old. When local marksmen would drive hours to her grandfather's ranch hoping to outshoot the girl they had heard so much about. The kind of pressure that came from trash talk and peer attention was nothing compared to the pressure of putting food on the table or defending her reputation against skeptical adults. "I'm willing to compete any time you want," Sarah replied simply. "Just let me know when and where." The exchange was overheard by training instructor staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been observing the flight's morning routine. Rodriguez had seen similar challenges arise before, and he knew that unresolved conflicts between recruits could create ongoing problems throughout their training cycle. Rather than shut down the challenge, Rodriguez decided to use it as a teaching opportunity. "All right, listen up," he announced to the entire flight. "It sounds like we have some disagreement about marksmanship abilities. Since you're all going to be retested on weapons qualification next week anyway, we'll settle this then." He turned to face Johnson and Sarah directly. "Martinez, Johnson, you'll both shoot the qualification course again, but this time we'll score it as a formal competition. Whoever gets the higher score wins. The loser does extra duty for a week, and more importantly, this settles the question once and for all." The announcement created immediate excitement among the other recruits. Word of the upcoming competition spread throughout their squadron and even reached recruits in other flights. By the end of the day, there were informal betting pools and heated discussions about the likely outcome. Johnson began to have second thoughts about his challenge as the week progressed. During practice sessions, he watched Sarah's consistent performance and started to realize that her initial scores hadn't been lucky accidents. Every time she picked up a rifle, the results were the same, near-perfect accuracy with a consistency that suggested years of serious training. But it was too late to back down without losing face completely. Johnson had made his challenge publicly, and now he would have to follow through regardless of his private doubts about the likely outcome. Sarah, meanwhile, remained focused on her regular training and seemed unaffected by the upcoming competition. She participated in all the standard basic training activities, helped her fellow recruits when they asked for assistance, and never mentioned the challenge unless someone else brought it up first. Technical Sergeant Park had been watching the situation develop with considerable interest. She had seen plenty of cocky recruits learn humility the hard way during her years as an instructor, but she had never seen someone with Sarah's level of ability face a public challenge from a fellow trainee. The day before the competition, Park pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "How are you feeling about tomorrow's shooting?" she asked. "Ready, Sergeant," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Johnson's been talking to anyone who will listen about how he's going to show everyone that you're not as good as people think," Park continued. "Does that bother you at all?" Sarah considered the question for a moment before answering. "My grandfather always told me that actions speak louder than words, Sergeant. Tomorrow we'll see whose actions speak the loudest." Park smiled at the response, recognizing the quiet confidence of someone who had faced doubters before and knew exactly how to handle them. "Any special preparation you're planning for tomorrow?" "Same as always, Sergeant," Sarah said. "Check my equipment, control my breathing, and put the bullets where they need to go." The evening before the competition, Johnson made one final attempt to gain an advantage by spreading rumors that Sarah had received special coaching from the instructors or had been practicing with better equipment than the other recruits. The rumors were easily disproved. Every recruit used identical equipment during training, and all practice sessions were supervised and standardized. But the rumors revealed Johnson's growing desperation as he realized the magnitude of the challenge he had created for himself. He had assumed that natural athleticism and determination would be enough to compete with someone who had been portrayed as having unusual shooting ability. Now he was beginning to understand that he had challenged someone whose skills were far beyond anything he had imagined. The competition was scheduled for early morning, with the entire flight observing and several additional instructors present to ensure fair scoring. The stakes had grown beyond just settling an argument between two recruits. It had become a test of whether exceptional ability could be questioned and challenged by someone with more confidence than skill. As Sarah cleaned her rifle the night before the competition, she thought about all the similar challenges she had faced over the years. Men who had questioned her abilities, doubted her results, or assumed that her reputation was exaggerated. Each time, she had let her shooting do the talking, and each time, the doubters had left with a new understanding of what real marksmanship looked like. Tomorrow would be no different. Johnson would learn the same lesson that countless others had learned before him, that some people are born with gifts that can't be matched through confidence alone, and that underestimating quiet competence is always a mistake. The girl from Nebraska who had started shooting rabbits with her grandfather's old rifle was about to demonstrate once again why Colonel Mitchell had been so confident in her potential. But this time, the demonstration would be in front of fellow service members who would spend the rest of their military careers remembering the day they watched true expertise silence a loudmouth challenger. The morning of the competition dawned clear and unusually cool for San Antonio in late summer. Sarah Martinez woke at her usual time, well before reveille, and went through the same preparation routine that her grandfather had taught her years earlier. She had learned long ago that consistency in preparation led to consistency in performance. While most of her fellow recruits were still sleeping, Sarah quietly made her way to the small chapel on base for a few minutes of meditation and mental preparation. This wasn't about prayer or superstition. It was about centering herself and ensuring that her mind was as ready as her body for the challenge ahead. By the time the rest of her flight was awakening and preparing for the day, Sarah had already completed her mental preparation and was focused entirely on the task at hand. She ate a light breakfast, checked her uniform, and reported for duty with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the week leading up to the competition. Derek Johnson, on the other hand, had spent a restless night second-guessing his decision to challenge Sarah so publicly. He had watched her practice sessions throughout the week and gradually come to the realization that he had seriously underestimated her abilities. But with the entire squadron now aware of the competition, backing down was not an option. Johnson's supporters among the other recruits had been offering advice and encouragement, but their suggestions revealed more enthusiasm than expertise. Several had recommended that he try to psyche Sarah out with trash talk or gamesmanship, not understanding that someone with her background had faced far more serious challenges than the opinions of fellow trainees. Technical Sergeant Park arrived at the range early to oversee the setup and ensure that every aspect of the competition would be conducted fairly. She had decided to make this a formal event that could serve as a teaching moment for all the recruits, regardless of the outcome. Both competitors would shoot the standard Air Force qualification course, but with additional observers and more detailed scoring than usual. When Sarah's flight arrived at the range, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Word of the competition had spread throughout the training squadron, and several instructors who weren't directly involved had arranged to observe. Even some recruits from other flights had found excuses to be in the area during the scheduled shooting time. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez called both competitors forward and reviewed the rules one final time. Each would shoot the standard qualification course, consisting of 40 rounds fired at targets placed at distances ranging from 75 to 300 yards. Scoring would be based on the official Air Force system, with maximum points awarded for hits in the center scoring rings and reduced points for hits in outer rings. This is not just about settling an argument, Rodriguez announced to the assembled recruits. This is about demonstrating professional competence under pressure and showing respect for your fellow airmen regardless of the outcome. Both competitors will conduct themselves with dignity, and all observers will maintain proper military bearing throughout. Johnson was given the choice of shooting first or second, and he elected to go first, hoping to set a high standard that might put pressure on Sarah. He approached the firing line with obvious nervousness, taking longer than usual to adjust his shooting position and check his equipment. His first few shots were respectable, but not exceptional, hitting the target consistently, but not achieving the tight groupings that would indicate expert-level marksmanship. As the course progressed through different distances and shooting positions, Johnson's performance remained steady but unremarkable. He was shooting well enough to qualify easily, but not well enough to impress anyone watching. The observers could see Johnson's frustration building as he realized that his scores, while adequate, were not going to be sufficient to win the competition unless Sarah performed far below her demonstrated abilities. His final shots showed the effects of mounting pressure, with several rounds hitting outside the higher scoring areas. When Johnson finished his course of fire, his total score was 312 out of a possible 400 points, a respectable performance that would have earned him a marksman qualification and satisfied most training instructors. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a score to be proud of for a recruit with limited shooting experience. But these were not normal circumstances, and everyone present knew that Johnson's score was unlikely to be competitive against someone with Sarah's demonstrated abilities. Sarah approached the firing line with the same calm confidence that had impressed observers throughout her basic training. She methodically checked her equipment, adjusted her shooting mat, and settled into her first shooting position with practiced efficiency. Her first shot rang out across the range, and the spotting scope confirmed what everyone expected, a perfect center hit. The second shot followed quickly, then the third and fourth, each one finding the same precise location in the center of the target. As Sarah progressed through the qualification course, it became apparent to everyone watching that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Her shots weren't just hitting the target consistently. They were creating groups so tight that individual bullet holes were difficult to distinguish even with binoculars. At the 200-yard line, Sarah fired 10 shots in rapid succession that created what appeared to be a single ragged hole in the exact center of the target. The observers, including several experienced shooting instructors, found themselves exchanging glances of amazement as they realized they were watching a level of marksmanship that most of them had never seen before. Technical Sergeant Park had been scoring the targets as each distance was completed, and the number she was recording seemed almost impossible. Sarah wasn't just shooting well. She was approaching the theoretical maximum score possible with the equipment and ammunition being used. When Sarah reached the 300-yard portion of the course, the most challenging distance for the qualification, some observers expected to see her performance finally show some human limitations. The 300-yard targets required precise sight alignment and perfect trigger control, and even expert marksmen often showed decreased accuracy at this range. Instead, Sarah's performance at 300 yards was, if anything, more impressive than her shooting at closer distances. She seemed to thrive on the increased challenge, and her shots continued to find the center of the target with mechanical precision. Johnson, watching from the sidelines with the other recruits, found his earlier bravado completely replaced by a mixture of amazement and humility. He had challenged someone whose abilities were so far beyond his own that the competition had become less about settling an argument and more about witnessing exceptional talent in action. When Sarah completed her final shot and the course was finished, the range fell unusually quiet as the instructors tabulated her scores. Park walked downrange to examine the targets more closely, followed by several other instructors who wanted to see the results for themselves. What they found defied easy explanation. Sarah had fired 40 rounds and achieved 39 hits in the highest scoring area, with one shot hitting the second highest ring, a near-perfect performance that translated to a total score of 398 out of 400 possible points. In 15 years of conducting weapons training, Park announced to the assembled recruits, "I have never seen a score this high from anyone, let alone a basic trainee. Martinez has just demonstrated a level of marksmanship that most professional competitive shooters would be proud to achieve." The announcement was met with stunned silence from the recruits, followed by spontaneous applause as they began to fully comprehend what they had witnessed. Johnson, to his credit, was among the first to congratulate Sarah, extending his hand and acknowledging that he had been completely outclassed. "I owe you an apology, Martinez," Johnson said quietly as the other recruits gathered around. "I had no idea what I was challenging. That was the most incredible shooting I've ever seen." Sarah accepted the apology graciously, without any hint of gloating or superiority. "You shot well, Johnson," she replied. "Your score would have qualified you as an expert marksman on most military ranges." Word of Sarah's exceptional performance spread rapidly throughout Lackland Air Force Base. Within hours, her achievement was being discussed in training squadrons across the installation, and several senior instructors who specialized in marksmanship training were making inquiries about the recruit who had shot a near-perfect qualification score. Colonel Patricia Williams, the base commander for training operations, personally reviewed Sarah's scores and requested a meeting with both Sarah and Technical Sergeant Park. Williams had been in the Air Force for over 20 years and had overseen the training of thousands of recruits, but she had never encountered a trainee with Sarah's level of demonstrated ability. "Martinez," Colonel Williams said during their meeting the following day, "your shooting performance yesterday was extraordinary by any standard. Technical Sergeant Park tells me that your scores throughout basic training have been consistently exceptional. I'm curious about your background and your intentions regarding your Air Force career." Sarah provided a brief summary of her shooting background and mentioned her previous conversations with Colonel Mitchell at Offutt Air Force Base. Williams immediately recognized Mitchell's name and understood the context for Sarah's recruitment into the Air Force. "Colonel Mitchell has quite a reputation for identifying exceptional talent," Williams noted. "If he recruited you specifically for competitive shooting, I can understand why. Based on what I've seen from your training records, you have abilities that could take you far in the Air Force, both in competition and in operational roles that require precision marksmanship." Williams went on to explain that Sarah's performance had attracted attention beyond the basic training environment. The Air Force marksmanship team was always looking for promising candidates, and several advanced training opportunities were available for recruits who demonstrated exceptional potential. More immediately, Williams authorized Sarah to participate in advanced marksmanship training during the remaining weeks of basic training, working with specialized instructors who could provide challenges more appropriate to her skill level than the standard recruit curriculum. The news of Sarah's expanded training opportunities created mixed reactions among her fellow recruits. Most were genuinely excited to see her abilities recognized and rewarded, understanding that she had earned special attention through demonstrated excellence. A few, however, grumbled about perceived favoritism, and questioned whether it was fair for one recruit to receive different treatment than others. Sarah handled the situation with the same quiet professionalism she had shown throughout basic training. She continued to participate in all standard training activities with her flight, helped other recruits when they asked for assistance, and never suggested that her special training made her different from or better than her peers. During her advanced training sessions, Sarah worked with Master Sergeant Robert Kim, a veteran competitive shooter who had represented the Air Force in national and international competitions for over a decade. Kim had been skeptical when he first heard about a basic trainee who supposedly shot better than most experts, but his skepticism vanished after watching Sarah's first training session. "I've worked with Olympic-level shooters," Kim told Technical Sergeant Park after one of Sarah's training sessions, "and I've never seen anyone with her combination of natural accuracy and mental composure. With proper training and competition experience, there's no telling how far she could go." Kim designed specialized training exercises that challenged Sarah in ways that standard military marksmanship training never could. He introduced her to precision shooting at extended ranges, rapid engagement of multiple targets, and shooting under various environmental conditions that tested her adaptability and problem-solving skills. Each new challenge was met with the same calm competence that had impressed every instructor Sarah had worked with. She absorbed new techniques quickly, adapted to unfamiliar equipment effortlessly, and consistently performed at levels that exceeded Kim's already high expectations. As basic training entered its final weeks, Sarah had established herself as something of a legend among the recruits and training staff at Lackland. Her original qualification scores were still being discussed weeks after the competition, and several instructors had requested permission to observe her advanced training sessions. But perhaps more importantly, Sarah had proven that exceptional ability, when combined with humility and professionalism, could earn respect rather than resentment from peers and supervisors alike. The quiet girl from Nebraska, who had never sought attention or special treatment, had nevertheless distinguished herself through pure competence and character. The competition with Johnson had been just the beginning. As Sarah prepared to graduate from basic training and move on to technical school and eventual assignment to operational units, everyone who had worked with her understood that they had witnessed the early stages of what promised to be a remarkable military career. Her shooting abilities were extraordinary, but her maturity, professionalism, and dedication to continuous improvement suggested that marksmanship was just one aspect of her potential contributions to the Air Force. The question was no longer whether Sarah Martinez was an exceptional shooter that had been definitively answered. The question was how far her combination of talent and character would take her in the years ahead. After completing basic training with the highest marksmanship scores in the history of Lackland Air Force Base, Sarah Martinez was assigned to technical school for security forces training at Lackland's East Campus. The assignment was carefully chosen. Security forces personnel required advanced weapons training that would complement Sarah's exceptional shooting abilities while providing her with valuable operational experience. Her reputation had preceded her to the Security Forces School, where Master Sergeant Jennifer Walsh served as the senior marksmanship instructor. Walsh had heard the stories about Sarah's basic training performance, but remained professionally skeptical until she could evaluate Sarah's abilities personally. In 22 years of military service, Walsh had trained thousands of security forces personnel and had learned not to believe every story about exceptional recruits. Sarah's first weapons training session with Walsh quickly dispelled any doubts about her abilities. Walsh had designed a challenging course of fire that typically took security forces trainees several weeks to master, involving precision shooting mixed with rapid target engagement under time pressure. Sarah completed the course flawlessly on her first attempt, achieving scores that exceeded those of experienced security forces instructors. Martinez, Walsh said after examining Sarah's targets, "I've been teaching marksmanship for 15 years, and I've never seen a trainee perform like that. Where exactly did you learn to shoot?" Sarah provided the same brief explanation she had given to others, her grandfather's training and years of practice on a Nebraska ranch. But Walsh pressed for more details, recognizing that conventional hunting experience couldn't account for the level of skill she was witnessing. As the conversation continued, Walsh learned about Sarah's background with Colonel Mitchell, her testing at various shooting competitions, and her consistent pattern of outperforming experienced marksmen since childhood. The more Walsh learned, the more she understood that Sarah represented a once-in-a-career training opportunity. Walsh immediately contacted Colonel Mitchell at Offutt Air Force Base to discuss Sarah's progress and potential advanced training opportunities. Mitchell had been monitoring Sarah's development through official channels and was pleased but not surprised to hear about her continued exceptional performance. Sarah has abilities that need to be developed at the highest levels of competition, Mitchell told Walsh during their conversation. The Air Force marksmanship team has been tracking her progress, and we're prepared to offer her opportunities that most shooters can only dream of. Within a week of Walsh's call, Sarah received orders to report to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs for evaluation by the Air Force marksmanship team. The evaluation would determine whether she qualified for assignment to the team and participation in national and international shooting competitions. The Air Force Academy's shooting facilities were unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. The ranges were equipped with electronic targets, sophisticated wind measurement systems, and precision ammunition that cost more per round than most people spent on entertainment in a day. Everything was designed to eliminate variables and allow shooters to perform at their absolute highest level. Chief Master Sergeant David Chun led the Air Force marksmanship team and had been coaching competitive shooters for over 20 years. He had worked with Olympic medalists, world record holders, and some of the finest military marksmen in history. When Chun first met Sarah, he saw a quiet, unassuming young woman who looked more like a college student than a world-class shooter. "Tell me about your shooting background, Martinez," Chun said during their initial interview. Sarah provided her standard summary, mentioning her grandfather's instruction and her informal competitions with local marksmen in Nebraska. Chun had heard similar stories from hundreds of shooters over the years, though few had arrived with the kind of recommendations that Sarah carried. "Colonel Mitchell speaks very highly of your abilities," Chun continued. "He believes you have potential for international competition." That's a significant statement from someone with his background and experience. The evaluation process began the next morning with precision shooting at known distances, using match-grade ammunition and bench rest equipment that eliminated most variables except the shooter's fundamental skills. Chun expected to see good shooting from someone with Sarah's reputation, but he was prepared for the possibility that her scores had been inflated by less rigorous testing conditions. What he witnessed instead was a demonstration of marksmanship that exceeded his most optimistic expectations. Sarah's first group at 100 yards measured less than a quarter inch, shot with a rifle she had never used before and ammunition she was unfamiliar with. Her 200-yard group was even smaller, and her 300-yard shooting defied conventional understanding of what was possible with service-grade equipment. "Stop shooting," Chun called after Sarah had fired just 20 rounds. "I've seen enough." Sarah looked up from the shooting bench, concerned that she had somehow violated safety protocols or made an error in the testing process. "Is there a problem, Chief?" she asked. "The only problem," Chun replied, "is that you just shot better than our current team captain, and you're doing it with equipment you've never used before. I need to call some people and revise our testing protocol." Chun immediately contacted the Air Force marksmanship team headquarters and reported that he had a candidate whose abilities exceeded anything in his previous experience. Within hours, additional team coaches and administrative personnel were en route to Colorado Springs to observe Sarah's capabilities firsthand. Over the next 3 days, Sarah was tested with every type of precision shooting that the Air Force employed in competition. She shot small-bore rifles, high-power rifles, and precision pistols, adapting to each new platform with remarkable speed and consistency. In every discipline, her performance exceeded the qualification standards for the national team. Major Lisa Patterson, the team's executive officer and a former Olympic competitor herself, conducted the pistol evaluation and found Sarah's results almost impossible to believe. Using a precision .22 caliber pistol at 50 yards, Sarah shot groups that would have been impressive with a rifle, demonstrating hand-eye coordination that Major Patterson had rarely encountered. "How long have you been shooting pistols?" Patterson asked. "My grandfather started teaching me pistol shooting when I was 10, Sarah replied. Said it was important to be proficient with multiple weapons. "What kind of pistol training did you do?" "Mostly target shooting at various distances, some practical exercises with moving targets, and a lot of practice drawing and firing quickly." Patterson realized that Sarah's grandfather's training had been far more comprehensive than most people understood. The old man had apparently provided instruction that rivaled formal military training in its thoroughness and effectiveness. The evaluation concluded with the most challenging test that the Air Force marksmanship team employed, a combined precision and speed course that required competitors to engage multiple targets at varying distances under strict time limits. The course was designed to separate good shooters from exceptional ones by testing their ability to maintain accuracy while performing under pressure. Sarah approached the challenge with the same calm demeanor she had shown throughout the evaluation. When the course began, she moved through the various shooting positions with fluid efficiency, engaging each target with minimal hesitation and maximum precision. Her final time was faster than any previously recorded by a team member, and her accuracy was perfect. Every shot had hit within the highest scoring area. Chief Chun gathered his coaching staff that evening to discuss Sarah's evaluation results and determine the appropriate recommendations for her continued development. The discussion was brief and unanimous. Sarah Martinez possessed the most exceptional shooting ability that any of them had ever encountered, and she deserved immediate assignment to the national team. "I've been coaching competitive shooters for over 20 years, Chin told his staff, and I've never seen anyone with Sarah's combination of natural accuracy, mental composure, and adaptability to new challenges. With proper coaching and competition experience, she could rewrite the record books." The formal recommendation was forwarded to Air Force headquarters the next day, along with detailed documentation of Sarah's test results and strong endorsements from every coach who had observed her shooting. Within a week, Sarah received orders assigning her to the Air Force marksmanship team with immediate effect. Her first assignment as a team member would be to compete in the National Rifle Association's national championships, held annually at Camp Perry, Ohio. The competition attracted the finest marksmen from military, law enforcement, and civilian shooting communities, and represented the highest level of competitive shooting available in the United States. Sarah's participation in the national championships would mark her transition from a promising recruit to a competitor on the national stage. But it would also introduce her to a new level of skepticism and resistance from competitors who questioned whether someone with so little formal competition experience could compete effectively against seasoned veterans. The weeks leading up to the national championships were intensive, with Sarah receiving advanced coaching in competition techniques, equipment optimization, and mental preparation for high-pressure shooting. Chief Chin personally oversaw her training, introducing her to refinements in technique that most shooters took years to master. "Competition shooting is different from anything you've done before," Chin explained during one of their training sessions. "The technical skills you've already mastered, but competition adds elements of pressure, distraction, and psychological challenge that even the best shooters struggle with initially." Sarah absorbed the instruction with characteristic focus, asking thoughtful questions and demonstrating rapid improvement in areas where she had limited experience. Her coaches were impressed not just by her shooting ability, but by her dedication to continuous learning and her professional approach to training. As the departure date for the national championships approached, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation that was unfamiliar after years of casual competition on her grandfather's ranch. This would be her first formal test against the best marksman in the country, and despite her confidence in her abilities, she understood that competition shooting would present challenges she had never faced before. Chief Chun provided final guidance during their last training session before departing for Ohio. "Remember," he told her, You've already proven you can shoot better than anyone on this team. The only question is whether you can do it when it matters most, in front of hundreds of people, with scores that will be published nationally. Sarah nodded, thinking about all the informal competitions she had won over the years, and all the doubters she had silenced through performance rather than words. Understand, Chief. I'll do my best to represent the Air Force well. I'm not worried about you representing us well, Chen replied. I'm expecting you to show everyone what exceptional marksmanship looks like when it's combined with proper preparation and competitive experience. The national championships would test not just Sarah's shooting ability, but her mental toughness, adaptability, and capacity to perform under the intense pressure of national-level competition. Success would establish her as a legitimate contender for international competition and Olympic consideration. Failure would raise questions about whether her exceptional range performance could translate to competitive success. As Sarah prepared for the biggest shooting challenge of her life, she carried with her the lessons learned from her grandfather, the confidence built through years of successful competition, and the knowledge that she had already exceeded every expectation placed upon her. The girl from Nebraska was about to face the ultimate test of her abilities against the finest marksmen in America. The National Rifle Association's national championships at Camp Perry, Ohio, represented the pinnacle of competitive shooting in America. For over a century, the best marksmen from military, law enforcement, and civilian communities had gathered on the shores of Lake Erie to determine who could claim the title of national champion in various shooting disciplines. Sarah Martinez arrived at Camp Perry 3 days before her first competition, giving her time to familiarize herself with the facilities and adjust to the unique atmosphere of a major shooting championship. The scale of the event was unlike anything she had experienced. Hundreds of competitors, thousands of spectators, and media coverage that would broadcast the results across the entire shooting community. Chief Master Sergeant Chun had warned her about the psychological challenges of major competition, but experiencing them firsthand was different from hearing about them in training. The constant noise, the pressure of performing in front of large crowds, and the knowledge that her scores would be scrutinized by experts nationwide created a level of stress that even her years of informal competition hadn't prepared her for. Her first event was the National Individual High Power Rifle Championship, a grueling 4-day competition that tested precision shooting at distances from 200 to 1,000 yards. The field included former Olympic champions, current and former military marksmen, and civilian competitors who had dedicated their entire lives to competitive shooting. Among the competitors was a team of Navy SEALs led by Petty Officer First Class Marcus Thompson, a veteran of multiple combat deployments who had earned a reputation as one of the finest military marksmen of his generation. Thompson had heard about the Air Force recruit who supposedly shot better than anyone in the military, and he was openly skeptical about claims that seemed too extraordinary to be believable. "I don't care what kind of scores she shot in training," Thompson told his SEAL teammates during their preparation for the championships. "Competition is different from anything she's done before. When the pressure is real and the stakes matter, we'll see what she's actually made of." Thompson's skepticism was shared by many of the experienced competitors who had heard stories about Sarah's abilities, but questioned whether someone with so little competitive experience could perform against seasoned veterans. The shooting community was small and tightly knit, and most participants knew each other's capabilities and histories. Sarah was an unknown quantity with claims that seemed almost impossible to substantiate. The first day of competition consisted of slow-fire precision shooting at 200 and 300 yards, conditions that should have favored Sarah's demonstrated strengths in accuracy and consistency. But the reality of competition proved more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Sarah's first few shots were good, but not exceptional, hitting within the scoring areas, but not achieving the perfect accuracy that had impressed her coaches during training. The crowd noise, wind conditions, and pressure of being watched by hundreds of experienced marksmen created distractions that she had never encountered before. Chief Chun, observing from the coaching area, recognized the symptoms of competition nerves and provided quiet guidance between shooting strings. Forget about everyone watching, he advised. Focus on the fundamentals that got you here: sight alignment, trigger control, and follow through. The targets don't know who's shooting at them. By the end of the first day, Sarah's scores were respectable, but not dominant. She was positioned in the middle of a highly competitive field, with her performance raising questions about whether the stories of her exceptional abilities had been exaggerated. Thompson and several other experienced competitors exchanged knowing looks, believing their skepticism was being vindicated. That evening, Sarah called her grandfather in Nebraska, something she had done regularly throughout her Air Force training, but never after a disappointing performance. Frank Martinez listened patiently as his granddaughter described her frustration with her first day of national competition. "Grandpa, I felt like I'd never shot a rifle before," Sarah admitted. "Everything that's always come naturally was suddenly difficult, and I kept thinking about all the people watching instead of concentrating on my shooting." Frank's response was exactly what Sarah needed to hear. "Honey," he said gently, "you remember the first time you shot in front of those police officers when you were 13? You were so nervous you could barely hold the rifle steady. But once you fired that first shot and remembered what you were there to do, everything else disappeared." "I remember," Sarah replied. "You told me that good shooting was about making everything else disappear except the target and the shot." "That's right. And tomorrow, you're going to remember that you've been out shooting grown men since you were a little girl. Not because you're lucky or because the stories are exaggerated, but because you have a gift that most people will never understand. Don't let anybody make you forget who you are." The second day of competition featured rapid-fire shooting at 200 yards, a discipline that tested both accuracy and speed under intense time pressure. Sarah approached the firing line with renewed confidence, having spent the evening refocusing on the fundamentals that had made her exceptional long before she ever heard of national championships. Her first rapid-fire string was a revelation. The distractions that had affected her the previous day seemed to disappear as soon as she began shooting, and her natural rhythm and timing returned with remarkable clarity. Her 10 shots created a group so tight that the scoring officials had to examine the target carefully to count the individual holes. The improvement was immediately noticed by competitors and spectators alike. Word spread quickly through the camp that the Air Force shooter who had struggled on the first day was now shooting at a level that few had ever witnessed in national competition. Thompson, who had been dismissive of Sarah's reputation, found himself reassessing his opinions as he watched her performance through binoculars from the competitor's area. "She's not shooting like someone with competition nerves," he observed to his teammates. "She's shooting like someone who remembers how good she actually is." As the day progressed, Sarah's scores climbed steadily through the field. Each shooting string seemed to build on the previous one, with her confidence and accuracy improving in direct proportion to her renewed focus on fundamental technique rather than external pressures. By the end of the second day, Sarah had moved from the middle of the field to contention for the overall championship. Her combined scores placed her within striking distance of the leaders, and her rapid improvement had captured the attention of every serious competitor at the championships. Chief Chin was pleased, but not surprised by Sarah's recovery. "Yesterday, you were shooting like someone trying to impress people," he told her after the day's competition concluded. "Today, you shot like someone who knows how to put bullets where they need to go. Which approach do you think works better?" The third day featured the most challenging portion of the championship, precision shooting at 600 yards, where wind conditions and equipment limitations separated true marksmen from merely good shooters. The distance required perfect technique and the ability to read constantly changing environmental conditions. Sarah's performance at 600 yards was a masterpiece of precision shooting. She seemed to thrive on the increased challenge, and her shots found the center of the target with mechanical consistency regardless of wind conditions or other variables. Competitors who had initially questioned her abilities now watched in silent amazement as she demonstrated accuracy that defied conventional understanding. Thompson, who was having an excellent competition himself, found that his own shooting was being overshadowed by Sarah's exceptional performance. After one particularly impressive string of shots from Sarah, he approached Chief Chun during a break between relays. "Chief, I owe you and your shooter an apology," Thompson said. "I've been skeptical about the stories I heard, but what I'm watching out there is the best shooting I've ever seen in competition. That young woman has abilities that I didn't think were humanly possible." Chun appreciated the professional acknowledgement from one of the military's most respected marksmen. "Sarah has a gift that comes along maybe once in a generation," he replied. "But more than that, she has the work ethic and mental discipline to develop that gift to its full potential." The fourth and final day of competition included shooting at the maximum distance of 1,000 yards, where atmospheric conditions, equipment limitations, and the shooter's ability to calculate complex ballistic solutions would determine the ultimate champion. At 1,000 yards, even small errors in technique or judgment resulted in significant misses. Sarah approached the 1,000-yard competition with the same calm confidence that had characterized her shooting throughout her recovery from the first day's difficulties. She had spent the evenings studying wind charts and ballistic data, preparing for the technical challenges that long-range precision shooting demanded. Her performance at 1,000 yards was perhaps the most impressive of the entire championship. While other competitors struggled with the distance and environmental conditions, Sarah's shots continued to find the center of the target with remarkable consistency. She seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of ballistics and wind reading that typically took decades to develop. When the final shots were fired and all scores had been tabulated, Sarah Martinez had achieved something that no first-time competitor had accomplished in the modern era of the national championships. She had won the overall individual high-power rifle championship, defeating a field that included some of the finest marksmen in the world. The victory margin was substantial enough to eliminate any questions about luck or favorable conditions. Sarah had not just won the championship. She had dominated it, setting new records in several categories and establishing herself as the most accurate competitive shooter that many observers had ever witnessed. The award ceremony that evening was attended by hundreds of competitors, officials, and spectators who had witnessed something truly extraordinary. When Sarah's name was announced as the National Individual High-Power Rifle Champion, the applause was immediate and sustained, reflecting genuine appreciation for exceptional performance rather than polite recognition. Thompson was among those who approached Sarah after the ceremony to offer congratulations and acknowledgement of her remarkable achievement. "Martinez," he said, extending his hand, "I've spent my entire career around some of the best shooters in the military, and I've never seen anything like what you did here this week. You've changed my understanding of what's possible in competitive shooting." Sarah accepted the congratulations graciously, remembering her grandfather's lessons about humility and respect for fellow competitors. "Thank you, Petty Officer Thompson. I have tremendous respect for what you and your teammates accomplish in your service. Competition shooting is just one small part of what it means to be a professional warrior." But Thompson wasn't finished. The conversation that followed would lead to the challenge that would become legend throughout the special operations community. "Martinez, my team, and I were talking, and we'd like to propose something," Thompson continued. "We've heard stories about your abilities. We've now seen your competition performance, but we're curious about how you might perform in a more tactical environment. Would you be interested in joining us for some practical shooting exercises, the kind of challenges that we use in our training?" The invitation was unexpected, but Sarah understood the implications immediately. The SEALs were offering her an opportunity to test her abilities in contexts that went beyond traditional competitive shooting, measuring her skills against the tactical marksmanship standards of one of the military's most elite units. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Sarah asked. "Various practical exercises," Thompson explained. "Multiple targets, time pressure, shooting positions, and environmental challenges that reflect the kind of marksmanship we use operationally. Nothing dangerous, but definitely more demanding than what you've faced in traditional competition." Chief Chun, who had been listening to the conversation, understood the significance of what was being proposed. The SEALs didn't make such invitations lightly. and their offer represented recognition of Sarah's abilities at the highest levels of military marksmanship. "Sarah," Chun said quietly, "this is the kind of opportunity that could establish you as more than just a competitive shooter. If you're interested, I can arrange for official Air Force support." Sarah looked at Thompson and his teammates, then back at Chief Chun. She thought about her grandfather's advice about never backing down from challenges, about proving abilities through performance rather than words, and about always striving to be better than she had been the day before. "I'm very interested, Petty Officer Thompson," she replied. "When and where would you like to do this?" Thompson smiled, recognizing the quiet confidence of someone who had faced doubters before and knew exactly how to handle them. "How about next month at our training facility in Virginia? We'll set up some courses that will test everything you've got, and we'll see how Air Force precision shooting stacks up against Navy tactical marksmanship." The challenge was set. The girl from Nebraska, who had just won the most prestigious shooting competition in America, would soon face a new test against some of the most elite marksmen in the world. The SEALs expected to demonstrate the difference between competitive accuracy and tactical proficiency. Sarah Martinez was about to show them that exceptional ability transcends any single application or environment.